Welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville for June 17th, 2024. I invite everyone to join Council in O Canada. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. In 1820, Indigenous people here began welcoming settlers from all over the empire. Soon they were helping slaves and free blacks escaping from the United States to settle here too. Today, our Indigenous founding partners are still here enjoying this land with us. They fish and camp under their treaty rights. Indigenous people in their thousands also live with us as neighbors and friends. Our Indigenous white and black settlers created a community with an attractive degree of harmony and prosperity. By 1857, Ontario gave official recognition to Oakville as a town. At Town Hall, all of these years later, we fly the flag of the Mississaugas of the Credit beside the flags of Oakville, Ontario, and Canada. We fly these flags together to acknowledge our origins. People from all over the world are attracted to the livability that we have created and continue to build. We offer newcomers a warm spirit of welcome. We offer everyone our founding story so everyone knows what we are part of. We feel sorrow and distress for acts of racism and intolerance suffered across Canada and here at home. We want our future to be equitable and inclusive for everyone. The path of truth and reconciliation can unite us all. Please keep well, stay safe, and let me and your member of council know of any chance to be helpful to you and yours. Please let us know anytime you can help increase Oakville's livability, harmony, or prosperity. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets for this meeting?
We have regrets from Councillor Algar.
All right. Councillor, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Council, we have a swath of minutes, 7 different sets of minutes in the agenda. Are there any corrections? And if there aren't, is there a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Councillor Dudek, thank you for the motion. Councillor Shi, thank you for the second. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that carries. We have no public presentations. We do have standing committee reports, the minutes of the Committee of the Whole workshop from May 27th, and the confidential minutes from the Committee of the Whole workshop on May 27th. And the motion is to approve the minutes of both of those. We need a mover and seconder. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Grant, thank you. Any objection? There being none, that carries. Would 2 of us like to move and second that we resolve into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Adams and Councillor McNeice, thank you. Any objection? There being none, that carries. Now we have a total of 9 consent items, 8 public consent items, and 1 confidential consent item. Councillor Adams?
I'd be happy to give you a motion to move the staff recommendations for each of them.
Thank you. I don't need a second, but I see hands for separations. Councillor McNeice, you're first.
Thank you, Worship. 8.5.1, I'd like separation. There's also a delegation on that item.
8.5 is separated.
Thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Deal?
I'd like to separate 8.3, 8.7, and 8.8.
All right. And Councillor O'Meara?
I got 8.3 and 8.7 were separated for me as well, but I would like to also, when we get there, separate 9.1, the confidential consent item.
All right, thank you for that. So a motion survives for 8.1, 8.2, 8.4, and 8.6. You're going to confuse me, councillors, with your hands up. I'm going to call the vote. I'm going to try to call the vote on those four. Is there any objection? There being none, that carries, and I thank you, council. 8.3 is up. Who wanted to separate that? Was that Councillor Haslett-Deal? Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I've had several residents talk to me about the public notice, and in particular, the distance. And while I recognize it's greater than the regulation, the concern is around the 240 meters. And I'm wondering, I'm sure we've had discussions before about this, but there are significant applications that occur, and 240 meters does not get to the attention of the local residents to the degree I think it should. And without a local paper, we continue to have concerns regarding the communication from the town. So I'm wondering, in this report, is it possible to ask them to go back and look at whether we can have a different distance for notification?
Councillor, is that a motion or a question? I've just had trouble following you there for a second.
So I'm prepared to move it, but I would prefer to have the staff advise whether or not they could go back and do some investigation on the meter distance, whether it can be increased, and if so, what would at least reach more than a few houses?
Well,
I guess it's a question.
All right.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. We can most definitely take that back, have a conversation with some of our colleagues about what we could expand that to. As you note, it already is greater than the minimum requirement, but we can certainly explore that more.
So is the minimum requirement 120 meters and this is 240?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor, do you have a motion to refer it back to staff, or what's your pleasure?
Well, if we could take all those that are related to the 240 out of this to be referred back for further review, I would be pleased to move that. All the rest, I mean, I have a couple other comments, but I do believe that, well, it might be double what the 120. We have people who still, they're not getting a letter. They are within, a reasonable distance, and trying to find a way to inform them would be helpful.
All right. Madam CAO, do you have any objection to us just referring the whole package back for a return in a month? Or whenever?
A return in August would actually, I think, work better.
Okay. Councillor, is that satisfactory? A motion to refer to staff until August to chase this point?
Yes, I'd appreciate that. And I had two other points on the report as well, if I'm allowed.
Before we move it, why don't you add your points?
Okay. So I'm really appreciative that there was a statement in it that the mayor and members of council will be informed about the town-wide matters and matters within their ward. Is it possible to establish some type of time frame in that regard? I understand in urgent matters it's not possible, but given it is a policy document, I wondered if there'd be some consideration of a time frame in which we would be notified of matters within the ward and the town? Again, that's a question for, I guess, Julie.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, let us, I would like to talk to some of our departments about that in terms of what a time frame might look like. So we'll take that back as well as part of the changes.
Okay. And my last comment is around RAs being notified. So at one point over the years, RAs would automatically, their president would get an email advising them of things like public engagement opportunities, planning applications. Can you just confirm that's the case? I didn't see it in the engagement report, but perhaps I missed it.
Through Mr. Mayor to the councillor, that is the standard practice. I believe it is in the guidebook, or at least should be there, that there's certain interested parties that we reach out to on major initiatives. So RAs and say the BIAs would be two, for example, that we would reach out to on a regular basis.
Okay, well, those are my two comments. If and at that, there's some questions, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazeltine is moving referral to staff for these two concerns, and staff are suggesting that they'll return in August with the result. Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Chisholm, are you on this matter or your own matters? Councillor O'Meara?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's on this issue here, but with some different issues in the report, and maybe they can be lumped in here. I was piqued towards the end of the report, sort of on other implementation opportunities, and where you had suggested at the end in-house expertise to help train staff or additional training options for staff. And it got me thinking about, I think our residents in Ward 1 were asked to fill anywhere from 5 to 7 surveys out in this past month. They're not aligned. We're not aligned in how much we're going out to our residents. They're just being layered on and layered on and layered on with more surveys. Have we looked into having one communications pathway or channel that all departments must go through in order to make sure that these things are aligning, and maybe people who are specialized in communication? So, and I love my engineers and I love my planners and I love all of you, but there's a training and there's an element to communicating. I think that we're looking maybe to start training everyone to do one thing. Have we looked at maybe how do we centralize all communications that leave the town so that we know when they're going, what the timing is of them, the tone of them, the nature, all of that? Have we looked at that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, our communications unit does provide advice on the different consultations going on and does recommend how to align. Having said that, with the volume of work and the volume of feedback that we would like to get from the community, we do certainly acknowledge that there has been a lot going out. We are exploring options around that expertise that you mentioned. But we do not have that at this time. But it is something, as we continue to look at the public engagement program, so this is the policy and procedure that supports that, but there are other tools and activities that we continue to look at. That is part of it. And how do we get better coordinated on that?
Yeah, so I think it's only going to get more complicated, and it's only going to be more and more. So when might we expect to see the next evolution of how we begin to have one voice coming out of town hall, where residents, I think they start to turn it off, right? They just, I don't know, what study was I supposed to do again in this? So when are we going to start to maybe hear back from that so we can sort of have a unified path forward here?
So that is part of our work plan for this term of council. We are, you may recall, we have the creation of a new communications and customer experience director position that we hope to announce very shortly. on that and waiting for their arrival. And that new person and this department, the Strategy Policy Department, will work together on that work plan. But it is for this term of council to advance that public engagement approach.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Worship. Just to add to Councillor Haslett-Teal's comments with respect to the 240 and it going out further, is there any consideration to understand the size of the development whereby it's 240? If we're just doing a house renovation or a house or an infill, I think 240 suffice. But is there, if we're doing major works or major developments, I would support Councillor's idea of going past 240. But would there be different stages of communication going out based on the size of the development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's a good suggestion. And when we take that back to talk with the departments, we'll be sure to include that as an option.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice.
Thank you. Through your worship to staff. Let me know if I missed this, but is there a possibility of something like a citizens panel where you get a sample size of residents together around sort of issues? I know there's some best practices out there. When I was at FCM, I met someone from Simon Fraser University Center for Dialogue that kind of looks into unique techniques, and I know there's one at University of Alberta, probably some out here. Let me know if I missed it here, but is there something that enables us to look at that? Because I think certain issues, we've got experts in our community, or sometimes it's just that you want a sample size of your community together around an issue. If it's not, it doesn't jump out at me here, but so I'm happy to add it to the referral list, but let me know if I missed it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. You're correct that that's not part of this current update. That would be one of the activities that I mentioned as part of our overall engagement program that we're speaking about, and you are 100% correct that there are lots of different best practices out there using community panels and new survey approaches to make sure that your engagement is statistically significant as well. So yes, that is definitely part of the next steps as we explore this further.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chisholm? Okay. All right, I'll call the vote on Councillor Haslett-Teal's motion to refer till August for those 2 points. Any objection? There being none, that carries, and that brings us to 8.5. Who wants the first crack at 8.5? Councillor McNeice.
I believe there's a delegate on 8.5, if I could hear from them first.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. There's no nothing from council? Fine. Madam Clerk, could you call the delegation?
The delegate is Brian Charlebois, who is virtual. I believe we've got him online. Yes.
Welcome, Mr. Charlebois.
Yes, good evening.
We see you and hear you very well. Please,
Excellent.
please share your information.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor Burton. I'm here speaking to you regarding agenda item 8.5.1, that bylaw 2024-72, a bylaw to amend public nuisance bylaw 2007-143, attached as Appendix A to the report from Municipal Enforcement Services dated June 4th, 2024 be passed. As such, staff is proposing a housekeeping amendment to Public Nuisance Bylaw 2007-143 to delete provisions for lighting, as lighting is currently regulated under Property Standards Bylaw 2023-74. However, the regulation of light will change substantially by removing any enforcement of direct light into outdoor spaces. So if we can, let's review Public Nuisance Bylaw 2007-143, Section 3, Prohibition. No person shall cause or permit any public nuisance. No person shall cause or permit any activities on one property which are obnoxious or which substantially reduce the enjoyment of another property, including, without limiting the generality of this section, activities such as the creation of vibration, the emission of smoke, dust, airborne particulate matter, or objectionable odor, and what I'm most interested in, C, no owner or occupant of a property shall cause or permit light to be broadcast directly from that property onto another property. And in quick review of the Property Standards Bylaw 2023-74, on page 23, section 18 for lighting, it reads, outdoor lighting shall be placed and maintained or have a barrier placed and maintained so as to prevent or block direct illumination of the interior of a dwelling or dwelling unit on an adjoining property, regardless of whether such dwelling or dwelling unit has or may have shades, drapes, or other interior window coverings. So in summary, 2023-74 does not enforce direct or indirect control and management of light broadcast from indoor or outdoor sources onto adjoining property outdoor spaces. 2023-74 considers only direct outdoor light and its illumination of a dwelling interior on an adjoining property. Therefore, direct light broadcast on an adjoining exterior property could be reflected into the dwelling and unenforceable. Neither bylaws reference artificial light values related to coverage area, color, duration, or intensity. Therefore, direct light broadcast on an adjoining exterior property could be without limit and enforcement. Outdoor spaces, especially side and backyards, in my opinion, should be considered an extension of the living area. Each Oakville resident should have equal access to light their outdoor space responsibly or keep dark without light trespass. Referencing Public Nuisance Bylaw 2007-143 one last time, no person shall cause or permit any activities on one property which are obnoxious or which substantially reduce the enjoyment of another property. Currently, my neighbor's outdoor lights broadcast from dusk till dawn directly into my outdoor space, which substantially reduces my family's enjoyment and permits unwanted reflected light into our dwelling. Mayor Burton and Council, I ask you to please retain Public Nuisance Bylaw 2007-143 as written. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charlevoix, for that detailed explanation of the concern. I turn to staff to explain their reasoning for the change.
Good evening, Your Worship, and through you. Staff have recommended this change simply because in 2023, Council enacted the Property Standards Bylaw. And with that, we really specified that it was to be lighting of the dwelling unit that would be considered to be unreasonable. So as an enforcement practice over the year, even though, as Mr. Charlevoix has outlined, the Public Nuisance Bylaw really does regulate that transmittal of light over the property line. But as a reasonable expectation of light transfer, it has not been enforced that way. It really has been enforced by way of light directed into the dwelling. And that really just is because the communities that we live in, as we become more urban, the setbacks are reduced. The expectation of light transfer onto another property is certainly elevated and has been and will continue to be as our community changes. So there is light transfer expected onto a property, so in a backyard, that sort of thing. But light to be directed into a dwelling would be considered unreasonable. And through the POA courts, this has been tried. So it is an accepted standard that light into a dwelling would not be considered reasonable and would be a violation. And that really has been our practice over the last 10 years. We did do a municipal scan that supported that regulation into the dwelling. 10 of the 15 municipalities that we scanned have regulations that are specific to light transfer into a dwelling rather than light transfer onto a property. And it really also is something that we considered as far as security. Some of the concerns that have been brought up to municipal enforcement through the development of the bylaw was security of somebody's property. So can I light it up? And considering crime prevention through environmental design and having appropriate lighting on the property were all considerations as part of our recommendation before you tonight.
It seemed to me that Mr. Charlevoix made the case that permitting, failing to enforce the old bylaw and now moving to permit light into the backyard, in his case, is reflecting into his interior. What relief does our new scheme provide him?
So if there is direct light transfer into the dwelling, that would be considered an offense.
But not reflected?
That's correct.
And why is it that how did we decide 10 years ago that we weren't going to enforce light spill into backyards?
It really is a test of what's reasonable and what the courts were willing to accept, understanding that we live in communities that are continually more urbanized, and there is light transfer from one to another, whether it be street light. In some circumstances, we've even received light complaints where the moon has cast more of a shadow than the neighboring light. So there's a number of considerations, and considering that security element and people's enjoyment of their property at night, the expectation of light transfer is there. And that would be, I'll give you an example, we have oftentimes pot lights that are put along the edge of the soffit. And that light will bounce off the brick of that particular dwelling, and it will cast light onto the neighboring property. It may illuminate a window that's there, and it could theoretically be considered indirect light, depending on, of course, the elevation of the light and that sort of thing. So it's been one of those things, it's difficult to test as far as the indirect. Direct light is much easier to prove because we can cast the shadow, we can get it in a photograph.
Well, I'll leave off my questions. I actually, all these years, have innocently had an expectation that I wouldn't have light trespass in my yard, but Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I understand fully a 60-watt bulb on a rear patio or a soffit light, but having seen a number of residences with very high-powered lights that light up for hundreds of feet around, if you're sitting on your patio or your deck, you can't face it because it is blinding. So that brings into some sort of measurement level, which even makes it more difficult for the apparatus and so on to do that. Is there nothing we can do in terms of distinguishing a difference between the 60-watt bulb and high-powered LED lights that are lighting it up like a football field?
So through you, Your Worship, if there is a light that is high-powered, very bright, and directed in a certain way, and it's directed towards a person's house, the likelihood of it directly impacting the dwelling would be high. That is the type of enforcement we would be able to do. If it was directed to the side of a home where there was no window, then it would not be something that would be considered a violation.
Would we be able to consider an outside living area as a part of the home? Because summertime, you're out on your deck or your patio and literally being blinded by your neighbor's light. Could that not be included in that interpretation?
Through you, Your Worship, outside living areas are generally not considered part of the dwelling unit. It would have to be, say, something that was fully enclosed and erected as part of an addition to the building. So it would not be a fully outdoor area. Then that would be the only opportunity for that to be considered as an indoor living space or a dwelling, part of the dwelling.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Deal.
I want to thank the delegate for his comprehensive report. One of the things that I I've heard a fair amount is the concern about wildlife in the backyard. We are rich with wildlife, as well as security precautions, which the director has pointed out. But in terms of lighting up your backyard, normally, you know, the neighborly thing to do would be that it's a sensor motion light, and it's not, and that it doesn't spill over, that it's to your backyard, not to someone else's backyard. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we're no longer going to be concerned about that. And while I want people to be able to have a sensor motion light, because we do want those elements for crime prevention, is there not a way to research how we phrase this or put it in, put something in place that finds the balance?
Through you, Your Worship. So we really have been trying to find the balance over the years, even though this is something that we haven't directly enforced. We have made recommendations to neighboring property owners to reduce light, change direction of light, add shields to the light. In some cases, certainly Community Conflict Resolution Services of Halton has been successful in mitigating some of the concerns. Overall, it's not a heavy hitter as far as the complaints go. We probably have about 30 per year right now. And any motion sensors that, as Councillor Haslett-Thiel has mentioned, the motion sensors can certainly play a part in some of the complaints that we receive. And in the current property standards bylaw, one of the regulations that's contained there is it would be a violation if your light went on based on activity that was outside of your property. So if you walk out your back door and your neighbor's light goes on because of their motion sensor, that would then be considered a violation.
Wow.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, maybe I'm dreaming here, but why don't we put living space as part of the resident outdoor living space as part of the structure or the home? Can we not do that?
Through you, Your Worship, if Council were to refer this back to staff, we could explore that further as far as outdoor living area definitions and how that could come into play.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good to know.
Councillor McNeice.
Through Your Worship, thanks to the delegate for all the information he's provided. And at the appropriate time, I have a motion to consider. Right now? Okay. So I'd like to refer this item back to staff to look into best practices on light transfer onto properties, including outside living spaces, as Councillor just mentioned, so that we can minimize the nuisance of transmission across property lines. As well, there's also transmission sort of going vertically into the sky. So there's dark sky regulations out there that I'd appreciate knowing about. Many municipalities have implemented them, while balancing the need for sensor-activated security lighting for safety and security purposes.
Thank you, Councillor McNeice. Is there any objection to Councillor McNeice's motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, that carries. Thank you, Mr. Charlebois, for the time you took to bring this to our attention. 8.7. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Councillor McNeice, are you referring all three parts back to staff, or just part number 1 and moving the recommendation for 2 and 3?
You're correct. Just part 1. I'm happy to move 2 and 3.
Madam Clerk, that carried.
Thank you.
8.7. Councillor Haslett-Thiel. We can't hear you, Councillor.
Thank you for the report and for some of the detail that you shared. I think one of the things that jumped out at me when I looked at it was that there are individuals who continue in certain departments to want to have that in person. And in some regards, some people I think might be confused about whether they can get it or not, and an appointment or not. And in particular, I hear about wanting to have a in-person discussion through with development engineering and with building. In some regards, ahead of their submission, so they get it right and don't have them back and forth. And I'm wondering if, and I'd look to you, Mayor Burton, for some guidance. The report gives us good information, but is there an opportunity to take advantage of what's in the report to have the commissioners for those areas to come back and talk to us about in-person service for their areas?
Is that, sorry, through you, Mayor Burton, I'm not sure I understand the question there.
That's two of us. Councillor Hazathiel, could you ask again, maybe just the question as opposed to the setup?
So my question is there an opportunity? So we're receiving a report. The report gives us some information about how people interact with us. I'm asking, can we have a further report that talks to the opportunity for either increased or clearer opportunities for in-person support for development engineering and buildings?
The short answer to that is yes, of course.
Yes.
And in consideration of that, can I get you to move receipt of 8.7?
Sure, but when would we get that report?
When it's ready, can I say? There's hardly anything else going on.
Fine, I will move it as is, and hopefully we can see something. Thank you.
Okay. Any objection? Councillor O'Meara, are you on this item? Well,
Yes, please.
before I call that vote, take your turn, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering if staff still have not figured out a way to turn that little thing off at the end that says your case will be addressed in 9 months from now. Because I know we had troubles doing that, but it continues to do nothing but absolutely infuriate the residents when they get that. So do we not have a quick fix while we're waiting for a longer or a mid fix to get to a long fix for this?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So you're referring to if I'm understanding you correctly, you're referring to a case has been submitted, and it is a case type that requires a long period of time in order to have an ultimate resolution. And the resident is only getting that longer term, the full completion, as opposed to steps within that.
I'm going to say that staff have told us, even though it says it's going to take 9 months to complete your case, it really doesn't. It might only take a few weeks, but that's when the system queues them all up and says this is how long it should take. So people are getting emails back saying, thank you for your email. Your case is open and should be addressed by 2025 of February or something. So like, instead of telling people it will be addressed by when, can we just stop and just say, we've got it, we're working on it? Is there a way to quick fix that?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So one of the better practices that we do is we need to give the residents some sort of idea as to a completion rate. I do understand your point around if it's a really long and it's not reasonable, that it might cause more harm than good. Part of what we do when we work with the departments in coming up with those service level agreements is determining how long on average those kinds of things take, oftentimes with worst case scenarios. So there is ways that we can go back to the departments and refine those service levels to better reflect reality, number one. And number two, we can definitely explore ways of perhaps giving individuals an idea of you can expect a contact within a more reasonable period of time as opposed to the full end date of the completion of the service request itself.
Yeah, this isn't the first time we've brought this up here at council, and this is, unfortunately, and I appreciate your response, I just don't think that's going to work. I think until we are instantaneous with this is how long it's going to take, then we tell people how long that's going to take, because people do not want to be told that somebody will call you back in 8 months from now. So there's a problem. There's a disconnect with, I believe it was Salesforce last time. We couldn't do something in the metric, whatever the algorithms were. So I don't know. But there's a disconnect there, and we just seem to be waiting until the tail fixes wagging the dog a bit on this instead of saying we have to fix this. Because I continue to get emails saying, I just wanted somebody to come and pick up garbage in the park, and I'm being told it's going to take months and months. And that should never be the response we give to people. So I'm wondering how we just fix that automated element to it. If we've got a director on the phone and he or she says, listen, we got real problems, it's gonna be about 4 weeks or 5 weeks, then that's fair enough. But when an automated thing comes back that may or may not be correct, I think that just fires people up. So anyway, I've taken a long time on this. I just wanted to raise it as a point because it's still happening. It's been happening for over a year, maybe longer now. So I don't know how many times that we can maybe highlight it as something that needs to be fixed ASAP because it's not going well. Thank you. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. And thank you for hearing Council's concern on the matter.
Yes.
I'll call the vote on receipt of 8.7.
Worship, Your Worship, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Councillor Chisholm.
I'm still here. Just a couple of comments. I echo Council Mayor's same issue with respect to the time frame and what happens. Where does it go? It comes back to the councillors to deal with. And unfortunately, a lot of our residents are not relying on Service Oakville, but they're calling their councillors to get in the fast track. So if we want to be effective, can we not put in a narrative in the statement saying this is a large request, it's going to take time of staff, different departments, and we will be looking at probably a 1 month, 2 month return on this, just to give people an understanding that some of these complaints or projects take longer, and the short ones we can get off the books very quickly. But we need to be ahead of the curve on this so they understand it, because a lot of them unfortunately say, oh yeah, it's a robot at the end and it's just doing it. So we're having real challenges with that on the customer service side of it. So I just leave it as that to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm, for your additional thoughts on that. Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, I'm happy to say that's carried. And that brings us to 8.8. Councillor Chisholm, are you 8.8? Okay, Councillor Hazard Thiel, 8.8.
First, I want to thank the clerk's office for the amendment that they made in regards to the use of public video. I did have a follow-up question just around enforcement mechanisms, and I note that there's going to be advocacy work to clarify who can file a compliance audit. But for clarity, before a decision is made to move it to the compliance committee, are we regularly consulting with our legal counsel to ensure that the definition of who is eligible is being considered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do invite legal to provide input into this, but it is a separate body from the legal department, so we would go through external counsel if needed.
Okay, I do think, given the importance of the process and the clarity that might be needed in this process, it just strikes me that we have access to legal resources that could determine what is defined as elector and to assist you, because I know we only want to do the right thing by everyone. So I just raised that point, and with that, I'd be prepared to move this.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, did I understand you to say that you do have legal counsel with whom you consult on these things or not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we do consult with internal legal when required, or when we are looking for interpretation from legal. But we will access external counsel should we need.
So they've got lawyers on the left and lawyers on the right, counsel. I think maybe the town solicitor could add a word here that will help counsel with this matter. Mr. Solicitor, isn't the very answer to this question being determined in the courts later this year?
Through you, Mayor Burton, yes, that's correct. There is an appeal of a decision by the Compliance Audit Committee that will be heard by the courts in October on this very issue.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the motion, Councillor Haslett-Deal. Is there any objection? There is no objection, and so that motion succeeds as well. And that brings us to 9.1, which is the confidential consent item on, as it's, I believe, listed in public, regulating the display and distribution of objectionable images. Councillor O'Meara, did you want to, is what you need to do with this something you can do in public, or would you like to go into camera?
I will probably have to go into camera. My apologies. I don't mind waiting, but yeah, I think we'll have to go into camera.
All right. Let's try that. We'll slip it down to the end. That brings us to discussion item 10.1, business licensing bylaw review. And as it happens, we have a delegation request from Katie Dean, who will join us momentarily, I believe. We have a presentation from Selena Campbell, who is the Director of Municipal Enforcement Services. Ms. Campbell, Madam Director, we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks. So good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I am here to speak to item 10.1 on tonight's agenda. Municipal Enforcement Services presented a report to council back on January 31st, 2022 that provided an update on the development of the new licensing bylaw and to obtain council's approval to continue preparation of that bylaw in accordance with the report at that time. The report presented this evening highlights work done on the licensing review since January of 2022 and includes a draft licensing bylaw for council's consideration. Staff is recommending the introduction of several new licensing types. Payday loan establishments, as requested by council on September 23rd of 2019. The draft bylaw limits the number of payday loans to 1 per ward, but grandfathers existing businesses that are properly licensed within the province of Ontario. At the same time, new licenses, at the time that new licensing comes into effect. New licenses, however, would not be permitted until the 1 per ward regulation is met. Temporary vendors includes day sales, the sales of flags and flowers, temporary merchants like bridal and sports equipment sales, temporary locations and special sales like liquidation sales. The licensing of special sales is already included in the existing, in the current licensing bylaw. In addition, we're recommending private property parking enforcement companies and officers to ensure that quality of service, timely submissions, and to provide recourse when regulations are not followed. Mobile and vehicle personal services, so changing business trends are seeing more services become mobile, especially during COVID. So being that services are now being provided at home rather than a brick and mortar location, we've recognized this change, and to ensure that the same principles of licensing are applied to all, we're recommending the licensing of these mobile businesses. The draft bylaw includes mobile motor vehicle services and mobile personal service operations. And those are defined as motor vehicle service means a business that is operated from place to place, offering or providing a motor vehicle facility, product or service such as oil changes, tire changes, glass repair, but it excludes tow trucks and tow truck services. A motor vehicle facility with a valid Oakville license would not need to separate a separate license to provide the motor vehicle service, but the licensee must comply with the requirements of that mobile service. So a business that is solely mobile or has a brick and mortar location in another municipality would require a mobile business license. The other class is a mobile personal service business. So this is a personal service establishment that's operated from place to place, offering or providing personal services, product or service such as hairdressing, barbering, manicures, or pedicures. A licensed personal service business would not need a separate license to provide a mobile service. However, they must comply again with the requirements for a mobile service. They must also provide a self-declaration stating that they have obtained a criminal record check for each employee who's going to provide that mobile personal service, and that that employee meets the thresholds defined in the bylaw that are in relation to Criminal Code and Controlled Drugs and Substances Act violations. So this is recommended because these employees may be entering into a dwelling and dealing with individuals who are vulnerable. So the other, one of the other new licenses that we're looking at is for attractions. So the current licensing bylaw has separate schedules for exhibitions and outdoor markets. The draft bylaw treats these businesses as attractions and rolls them all into one schedule. So an attraction is defined as a temporary event that is open to the public and draws or is intended to draw visitors by providing something of interest, like an exhibition, farmer's market, or flea market, festivals, or carnivals. So the attraction license is an umbrella type of license, where the organizer or the owner of the property would then be responsible for getting or obtaining the license, rather than each vendor obtaining their own licenses is the current requirement. The organizer or owner must obtain required documents from the vendors, obtain health inspections, and ensure that the vendors are insured. Putting the onus for licensing on the owner or organizer should simplify the process of getting the events licensed. An attraction that's held on town property under a town permit or that is approved by council would not require an attractions license. So I'll speak to that a little bit further now because we are trying to streamline this process for all of the applicants. So currently a food shop or refreshment vehicle is participating at an event held on town property under a town permit. And the food shop or refreshment vehicle does not have an annual license. That food shop or refreshment vehicle would require a special event license. The draft bylaw provides that an event held under a town permit or approved by council would not require a business license, as staff are working on streamlining and aligning the special event requirements. So this means that an event held under a town permit would not require the attraction license, and the food vendors operating in the event will also not require a special event or food shop special event vehicle license if the event is held under the town permit. So contractors, the current licensing bylaw has 6 separate schedules for various contractors with many of the same requirements for each contractor license type. The draft bylaw rolls all of these into one schedule so that it simplifies the access to the bylaw for each individual contractor. It makes it a little easier to read. Now, understanding the key requirements for developing the licensing bylaw, one of them was really to find ways to streamline this process and make it easier for businesses. The key way that we did this was through an endorsement program. So currently, the licensing bylaw requires that businesses engaged in more than one activity require a license for each separate activity. So if you have, for an example, you have a gas station who sells fuel and cigarettes, they would be required to get a motor vehicle facility license and a tobacco license. So what we're trying to do is roll that into one, because those may have separate renewal periods where they actually have to go through the separate licensing process twice, paying fees, submitting all the documents. So to streamline that, we're going with a single license that they would license under the main business, and any ancillary use that they have, cigarettes or food sales, would be under an endorsement. They could apply for it all at one time, only have to license once per year, and we are expecting that the fees are going to be reduced as a result of that. And then vehicle age. We have a number of classes of business license that deal with vehicles and the age of vehicles, limousines and taxis being 2 of the key ones. So the draft bylaw deletes the model year restriction for driving while driving instruction vehicles, limousines, and taxi cabs. However, when these vehicles reach 10 years of age, what we would require instead is a second vehicle safety at the 6-month period within that licensing period to ensure that the safety of the vehicle is maintained. So the draft bylaw also provides that licensing commissioner may deny a request to operate these vehicles if they are over 10 years of age and it's felt that the vehicle is unsafe. This decision could be appealed to the appeals committee. So the taxi cab lottery, currently the licensing bylaw provides for a taxi cab lottery to be held when the number of taxi cab owners dips under a ratio of 1 to 1,500 population. So staff does not anticipate the need to hold a lottery in 2024, and the elimination of the taxi ratio when the final version of the bylaw comes into force in 2025, hopefully, will mean that the lottery will no longer be required. So we are hoping to release additional plates this year, and if we don't have the lottery, then the drivers would not be required to pay the additional fee. They could come in, obtain the license without having to go through that process. So it does streamline it for them. Delivery of graphic images. So last June, staff was directed by council to include options to address the delivery of graphic images in the licensing bylaw review. The City of London adopted a graphic image delivery bylaw on May 3rd of 2022. Burlington, St. Catharines, Woodstock, Ingersoll, and Blandford Blenheim have adopted similar bylaws to that of London. Calgary, Adiri, and Okotos, I think it is, in Alberta have also passed bylaws regulating the delivery of graphic images. So these bylaws define graphic images as an image or photograph showing or purporting to show a fetus or a part of a fetus. Generally, these bylaws are require that the graphic images delivered to the residents be fully concealed in an envelope or package that is marked with the name and address of the person or organization responsible for delivering the package, and that a warning on the envelope be there to note that it contains a graphic image that may be offensive or disturbing to some people. Enforcing a graphic image delivery bylaw would be challenging. So if a graphic image is delivered anonymously, enforcement staff would be unable to prove who delivered the image, so charging any particular individual would be unlikely. In February of 2024, the Association of Reform Political Action Canada initiated litigation against the City of St. Catharines graphic image delivery bylaw. So MES and legal will monitor the progress of this legal challenge and report back to council. So due to the enforcement challenges and the ongoing litigation against St. Catharines, staff recommends that council wait on the outcome of the legal challenge before considering whether or not to adopt a bylaw to regulate the delivery of graphic images. So next steps. If the recommendations in the report are approved, next steps are that Municipal Enforcement Services will circulate the draft bylaw to licensed businesses and to businesses that fall under the new licensing types for their comments, make any updates to the draft bylaw, if required, and present the final licensing bylaw to council for approval in Q4 of this year. The final bylaw would be expected to come into effect of Q4 of 2025. This would provide staff time to update the portal and provide any back-end software updates. And then the recommendation is before you tonight, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. As it happens, you have a few, and we'll lead off with Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question with the vehicles, the age of vehicles. I feel sorry sometimes with the taxi population in Oakville and what's happened with the shared economy with Uber and so forth. So how do we control age of vehicles if they're Uber drivers?
So Uber drivers are a little bit different because they really are regulated by Uber. Uber sets the vehicles. We do not have an age for those vehicles. So it is different. The business model is different, so they are licensed differently.
So we have no authority or power with respect to the Uber drivers, with respect to their age of their vehicles? Is it a provincial or a federal regulation?
Sorry, through you, Your Worship, all of the vehicles do require vehicle safety standards checks as per the HTA. So the vehicles should be safe to drive. They are required to do those checks. They are not considered to be commercial vehicles like a taxi. They are personal passenger vehicles, so they do have a different standard.
Okay. And my last question with respect to, and help me understand this, if we have a business or an owner of a building and he's looking for leases to go into it, and a new business comes into lease square footage in this building, how do you get that? Is there a part of the process you get a business license at that time? Because I understand in past, there are businesses in Oakville that don't have a business license. How do we deal with that, making sure they have business license when they start up a new business leasing square footage in a building?
Sorry, through you, Your Worship. We do have, and I remember many, many years ago, and this might date me a little bit, but I worked with Halton Region on BizPal, and that version of that, I believe, is still ongoing, where it really says, these are some of the things you should do. Halton Business Services is wonderful at making sure people understand the requirements, especially for licensing. When people contact Service Oakville is also wonderful at making sure that they understand before you sign a lease, and certainly municipal enforcement staff do the same thing. Before you sign a lease for that business, you really need to ensure that the location is zoned appropriately for the use that you want, and that you'd be able to get a business license for that and the requirements of that business license. And that way people aren't over their heads before they even start.
Yeah, in history, I think that's what's happened. If I'm not mistaken, we had a dog grooming business in the wrong zoning in Oakville, and it became a real issue. And when we did a little bit of more investigation, we realized a lot of businesses didn't have business license, so, and we're aware of the zoning. So as long as we have that process in place where they do have a business license and they understand they're in the proper zoning, because I understand it too through time that some of the owners of these buildings don't really, how I say, concern themselves with that. And the reality of it is when there's an issue, then all of a sudden the town is unfortunately being the person coming in saying the enforcement, your business shouldn't even be here on the zoning. So I want to avoid that as much as possible through the business licensing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
Thanks very much. 3 questions for you. Can you tell me about the renewal date for licensing, in particular for refreshment vehicles? It's now going to be May 31st, I think. Is that correct? Could we change that to May 1st? Because I know that we've got events that start earlier in the spring that do bring in refreshment vehicles, and they then get caught requiring a double licensing for a single season. Is that correct?
Through Your Worship, we would be happy to make that adjustment.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Second question for you is: do we license window or garage door or door repair and installation contractors?
Through Your Worship, we're just double checking. I think if they're considered as building renovators, then yes, they would require a license at this time, but we'll confirm that for you in just a moment.
So in particular, like garage door people or emergency repairs to windows, those kinds of things, that wouldn't necessarily be the standard contractors, and so I wonder how do we deal with them? Are they listed on, do we give them the same treatment that we give other contractors by putting them on our website, that kind of thing?
Through Your Worship, we can certainly have a look at that and see whether or not all of those fall within our current building contractor licensing class. As far as any licensed contractors that we have, we do try to keep everybody online and updated, and that way residents have the opportunity to look at our licensed contractors at a glance and be able to utilize their services.
So I think that's a wonderful thing that we do, giving a leg up to those contractors that are licensed. And I think there's an opportunity there, I think, for giving some better treatment to good operators that are in that space working on emergency repair kind of things. The same thing might apply to roofing.
Through your worship, I would agree, and anything we can do to help encourage people to license to take advantage of that feature would be a good thing.
Okay. And then my last question for you, I just want to confirm, Councillor Lischun and I were just chatting about the attractions license, and my read of the draft as it is that a town permitted event doesn't require a license. So, for example, the fair that was run for Northeast Oakville was permitted at a town location and therefore didn't require a license, or wouldn't require a license.
Through you, your worship, that is our intent.
Okay.
So right now, our special events team and our licensing group have a lot of similar requirements. So what we're trying to do is streamline those and align those so that the licensing would no longer be required, that they would be covered through the permit process.
Okay, and that was having gone through that process, I'd say it's like 90% the same stuff. So I agree with that. Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate that. And I look forward to those two other things being considered or changed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Sorry, I can move my glass. It's right by the button here. I keep hitting it. I just have a couple questions with regards to the food truck, refreshment truck, the truck element here. So am I correct in reading that we've upped the liability insurance from $2 to $5 million now?
Through your worship, that is correct.
Okay,
it's
so
consistent with town requirements, and generally speaking, insurance requirements across the board and other municipalities are all increasing to the $5 million mark.
Okay, I mean, part of this this adventure was to try and do everything possible we can to make it easier for food trucks. There's no way a young graduate from George Brown College was going to walk in and open a restaurant and start going, but they might be able to get a food truck. So is this something that maybe if we're looking at trying to get rid of red tape and try to make it easier and more financially affordable for people that we might be able to sort of just take a break on, or that's something that we just want to make it easy so it's all the same level playing field here?
Through your worship, we've tried to keep it the same, be consistent throughout. It is really a standard that we have in the town. And from a liability standpoint, whether you're a restaurant or a food truck, I think the risk of injury is the same. So which is why we've done the recommendation where it is a standard insurance rate across the board.
Okay, and then the second thing is, do we offer longer term renewals? Like, is this every year they have to do this, or would there be the possibility of looking at maybe a 2 or even a 3-year licensing? So they go through the process once, but they know that they're good for a couple years now. They don't have to continue to go through the litany of things every year.
Through your worship, that is a very interesting comment. Let us take that away and investigate that a little further.
Okay, perfect. And then my last question here. So most of the food trucks are going to be operating in the summers. So we're telling food trucks now it's going to be 2 years before this is going to come into effect. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that is correct.
It just seems to me a long time to wait to try and bring some vibrancy and some food options to some of the events and some of the community groups here. There is no other way that we can expedite this one a little more?
Through your worship, we're looking at bringing this report back in the fall of this year. Part of the hesitation to bring it any earlier than as far as an implementation time is because there's a lot of back-end work that needs to be done, especially considering the endorsement program. It's going to completely change our online portal and our Amanda system. So there's a lot of background work that will need to be done in order to accommodate the new system.
And I guess that's what happens when we bundle something this big up. They tried to do it with Metrolinx as well, and look how well that worked. Well, I would appreciate if there's any way in your work that we might be able to look at this. I've heard from councillors in every single ward that we're trying to bring more vibrancy. It's in our strat plan, it's in our mission statement. We're trying to do things that make it easier for people to get together, and anything I think that we can do on this element that can help. I'm nervous about Canada Day and where people are going to eat down there. So anything we can do that will bring this about a little quicker would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Knoll.
Excuse me. Thank you, Your Worship. I have questions and comments on two of the sections. The one on payday loans and the other one is on attractions. I'll start with payday loans. First of all, thank you for bringing this forward. I know it's been a long time in coming and lots has popped up along the way. That little thing called the pandemic happened, and so I know it took a while to get here. I must say that I am disappointed that there isn't more we can do, but I understand the limitations. But I do have one question with respect to the one payday loan establishment per ward. That actually seems like too many. I looked at the City of Toronto bylaw, and it seems that they establish some finite number. I'm not sure how they come up with that number, but is there not a way we can simply establish a number of acceptable payday loan companies across town? Because if we had one in each ward, that's 7. It's probably more than we have now, I would guess. It just seems like it's an awful lot of payday loan companies when, you know, these are, I'll say it and get sued, these are vultures, and we really need to find ways we can limit within every extent of the law.
Through you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Knoll. There are different ways that we could look at the number of payday loan businesses, and you are correct, we do have a number of them already in place. There are currently 4 licensed businesses that are licensed with the province. 2 of them, it looks like most of them are in Ward 2. So considering that, what we said was that it would be 1 per ward to have an even distribution throughout the town. Not to say that that's the only way that we can limit the number. So we can certainly take that back and look at other options to limit that number further.
A good number to look at would be 0, but I mean, I guess that's not possible because we don't have the right to prohibit things. So I would appreciate that if you come back with that. Secondly, on attractions, following up actually to a degree on what Councillor O'Meara was talking about, we want to do things to create vibrancy and excitement and the enthusiasm in our communities. And this seems to me, the way I read it, I think it has a bit of a chilling effect on that, to be honest with you, because it's actually putting licensing fees and regulations in front of sometimes pretty minor events that wouldn't otherwise maybe have insurance. Or, for example, even large events where, you know, the intentions are entirely, you know, charitable, like, for example, the Rib Fest that's coming up this weekend. By the way I read this, the Rib Fest would require a specific license, adding an additional cost to their program. But let me ask you a question just to clarify what might fall into this. So let's give you an example. Let's say a service group, a local service group, decides to have and this is a real example, decides to have an Easter festival on their property. So it's not a town permitted event, but something they've been doing for years, and they do little games for kids and such. Would that require a license if it's required and if it's in the town of Oakville?
So through Your Worship, depending on the event, and if they had sort of carnival games or an exhibition style, they may require a license. Now, smaller events and charitable or nonprofit events, we are proposing that the licensing fee be reduced by 50%.
Right.
So we have looked at the charitable component, and we're trying to make sure that we assist them as much as possible. I think the nice thing about having the attraction license is it reduces the impact on those food vendors. One of the challenges that a lot of events have is that they're unable to find licensed food vendors in time, or the process has been onerous for the food vendors, or it's been difficult to get them there. So this process hopefully will streamline that for them and reduce the overall cost.
Okay, I understand in certain applications where this would have some value, but I am concerned about some of the smaller community-style events that would otherwise, this would just add to the burden of having volunteers have to fulfill them. So you said that, like in the example I made, or I suggested about an Easter festival for children by a service club. You said it depended on whether they have rides and such. So if they don't have rides that are TSSA licensable or require licensing from TSSA or inspections, and they had simple, egg toss games and things like that, would that require a permit?
Through your worship, it likely would not. If they were doing just a picnic where they were doing an egg game or crafts or that sort of thing, I don't think we would necessarily call that an attraction, just because it's very small in scale. If they were to have the bouncy castle and the other rides and that, it might change the definition. But just a small picnic event likely would not meet the definition.
How do you codify that so that it's clear?
So, I don't know.
I don't see anything in there. I don't see any exemptions in there for that sort of thing.
No, it really is looking at whether or not there's that equipment. Is it an attraction? Let me just find that definition for you. The definition.
While you're looking for that, I mean, the words that really chill me on this particular thing is providing something of interest. It is so broad that literally that would take my Easter festival that I'm referencing, or a local, local charity wants to hold a used book sale, for example, which I know happens on Kerr Street from time to time. And that would fall under, they'd have to now get, the one on Kerr Street would also have to go to the BIA to get permission in addition to the town. So I'm just curious how do you limit to allow for smaller scale events without it just falling, how do you create codification so it doesn't, these smaller events don't get stuck in this and it discourage people from actually even trying to make them happen?
Through your worship, that is a challenge. Yeah. So let me take that one away. Let's look at the language a little bit closer and see if we can provide more clarity as far as the events and smaller events and where that line lies.
And I would strongly suggest finding some words other than providing something of interest. That's just so broad. And it's very subjective, right? So I don't know if you can find a way to deal with that. Also, just a question. I noticed that, for example, educational institutions are exempted. Why are educational institutions exempted and charities aren't?
Through your worship, so educational facilities were exempted. Oftentimes schools have a number of days throughout the year. So we were really trying to simplify that. The board, school boards usually have adequate oversight of those events, whereas sometimes you'll get the smaller not-for-profit or charitable organizations that don't have the same oversight. So we did try to accommodate them by reducing the fee, but really provide that oversight.
Right, but the fee's not the only thing that concerns me, just so you know. So the fee is one thing. Do you know what the fees are? I didn't see a fee table. Is there a proposed fee at this point, or is that in the budgeting process coming up?
Through you, your worship, we are still developing the fees. We're working with finance to finalize those. We are trying to keep this one as low as we can.
Okay, so the fee's not the only thing that concerns me. For example, right now, everything that falls under this section, Schedule 6 of this bylaw, requires insurance. And so, a local group, again, that wants to hold a book sale, unless we find a way to get them out of this, they would require an insurance policy, which probably the cost would exceed the kind of money that they're raising. I'm just really concerned about smaller scale, fun community activities that could find themselves stuck in this bylaw. I can understand the need to really regulate larger scale events. Like I cited the Rib Fest, and I actually don't even object to the Rib Fest being part of this because there's so many moving parts with that. I get that. But I'm more concerned about the smaller community events, like the North Oakville Fair, for example. Now that's on a town property, but it's permitted, so it's exempt. But what if it wasn't? What if it was in a local shopping center?
Through your worship, it likely would require a license if that were the case.
Okay.
But we'll take that away and look at it a little more in depth and see if we can provide more clarification as far as the attraction and what is included.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that, because I do, again, just the emphasis that I'm trying to place on this is really the small scale community engagement kind of events that I'm really concerned are going to fall into this and cause problems for service clubs, neighborhood associations, all those sort of smaller groups that do these things kind of on an ad hoc basis. I think of Jack's Lemonade sale, for example. Years ago, used to raise money for Sick Kids Hospital. That would fall under this, as far as I can tell, because it's usually held on private property. So there's just all kinds of like these little small events that I think could be problematic. So I'd appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through your worship, to staff. Just two questions. First on food trucks, then fireworks. Is there any way we could look at a pilot, to what Councillor Romero was saying, to advance things a little bit quicker around food trucks, because they add so much vibrancy? I think they're going to have a challenge with the $5 million insurance liability. We had 2 major events with tens of thousands of visitors last year, and we could get 0 food trucks there. And I'm not totally sure why. I think they don't want to jump through the hoops of another special event permit and things like that. And can we also look at, I believe Kitchener or somewhere has sort of relaxed a lot of their regulations around food trucks, and they've really got the numbers up, and it's hell's not freezing over. Everything seems to be okay there. So maybe just scanning some of the communities that are attracting food trucks, especially for events, I think would be helpful. Because certainly in our area, we could use them yesterday. And going into Canada Day again, I don't believe we have any food trucks signed up for a couple years in a row now. So that'd be my request on food trucks. On the fireworks, which I think is schedule, I lost it here. I think it was schedule 15. Seems like in the red line, there are quite a few changes, and I know we've got a staff report request in just around taking a comprehensive look, the sale, the police involvement, what else we can do with the continued activity with youth and fireworks in Bronte. I guess we're just receiving this for now, but I'd be hesitant to make any changes without doing that comprehensive look at, what else can we do, especially considering what's been happening in our area. So do you have any advice on that? I know, I think the changes were maybe deregulating it a little bit as far as providing some notice 10 days ahead, things like that. So I'd be hesitant to move on any of that until we've taken that comprehensive look.
Through your worship, there are limited changes in the proposed bylaw with respect to the sale of fireworks and licensing of vendors. There is a more comprehensive review of discharge to fireworks bylaw that is currently underway. I think there'll be more information once that review is complete that we'll be able to provide to council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going to carry on with Councillor Knoll's comments, and I'm fully in agreement with that. In my years of background with special events, one size does not fit all with respect to events. What we need to do is, you might have already done it, but I would synchronize your analysis and your work with the parks and open space and the recreation with respect to the special event strategy. There are different levels and different types of special events, and I know we've been tossing this back and forth, and because a lot of the issues about liability insurance, and we nickel and dime them to death on equipment brought in, picnic tables and so forth. What we're trying to do, and I think we want to make it easier, one-stop shopping, and they are promoting events and supporting Oakville, and it's good for Oakville. So I look at all our organizations, whether not-for-profit or they're charitable or they're doing something on behalf of the Oakville citizens, which is really important. So I don't want to be, how do I say, mitigate their problems with their finances. Well, excuse me, I'd like to mitigate their financial problems, because what we're asking for sometimes is a little above and beyond for what their event is. And I've known for a fact that some say, no, we're not going to run an event because of the costs associated to it and the restrictions or the guidelines that are associated with it. So may I suggest that in tune to your licensing and whatever those fees are in relation to the levels of special event delivery by our organizations within the town of Oakville, that it makes it feasible for them to have the event in Oakville, instead of being tied down with bureaucracy, I guess is more what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that Councillor Knoll is absolutely right. What gets caught in the middle of these small neighborhood organizations, not-for-profit, church things are going on. we need to be very clear and analyze what is in and what is out and what's requirements. So I think there needs to be a lot more work done in that with respect to our events. And so, again, not to repeat myself, but can we synchronize with our special event strategy report and the people involved with that so we have some continuity and understanding? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. You can take the answer as yes. Council, our registered delegate did not appear and is not in the wings. And so it would be in order for a motion. I'm just going to add a few words to item number 1 of the 4. That Council's comments and the draft licensing bylaw attached as Appendix A to the report from MES be received for consideration and not passed at this time. And then item 2 is passing a little bit of licensing in Appendix D, as we discussed. 3 is circulating the rest of the material, and 4 is reporting back on that. And Councillor Knoll is providing us the motion. Does anyone have an objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, that motion is successful. Thank you. Now, if we give our attention to Catherine Hewitson, she will present on how well we're doing with our corporate asset management plan, Part B for non-core assets. I know when for the public's benefit, the province has required cities to create asset management plans. This is something that, a long time ago, cities never thought about. And this council and this town have always prided ourselves on being ahead of the curve on that. Tonight we're going to find out how far ahead or behind we are. And Ms. Hewitson, you have our undivided attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Council. I'm pleased to be here to provide an overview of our corporate asset management plan Part B for non-core assets as explained. So staff have been working on developing asset management plans for the non-core assets in order to meet the July 1st, 2024 deadline of the regulation. The corporate asset management plan Part B includes information required by the regulation for facilities, parks, licensed fleet, equipment, and information technology assets. The purpose of the meeting today is to provide a bit of a review of the regulation, refresh on the Oakville Asset Management Plan service level framework and governance structure, to present an overview of the service profiles for the non-core infrastructure, and lastly, to approve the Corporate Asset Management Plan Part B for non-core infrastructure. Strategic asset management is a decision-making process that answers the fundamental question, how do we best care for the assets that deliver services to our residents that they rely on an everyday in a predictable and cost-efficient manner? It's about developing a long-term plan that not only maintains our existing assets, but identifies future infrastructure needs required to provide services as the town grows or build resiliency against environmental impacts, so that our residents can enjoy the services and amenities that contribute to their quality of life. It helps us plan for the future, manage risk, maintain our assets over the whole lifespan, and determine how to best invest our resources. It requires clearly defined organizational and associated asset management objectives to ensure that decisions at all levels consistently drive towards the realization of value for customers and our stakeholders. The main components of the asset management program are service levels, risk, and costs, which result in achieving the best value from our services. Service levels consider the current and future performance needs of our assets. Risk involves minimizing the impact of asset failure and considers the level of consequence to the service. Cost involves identifying the options and looking at the whole life cost of the asset, not just the initial capital outlay, but the ongoing maintenance, renewal, and future required funds for replacement. When all three are considered in our decision-making, it allows us to deliver safe and sustainable services. So what do people want in our community? They want safe, sustainable services in a predictable and cost-effective manner. By having clearly defined service level objectives, we can determine the asset performance needs and the different options available. Then by assessing the whole life cost and the individual risk factors, we can determine the most appropriate budget investments required in our infrastructure. Using the risk-based prioritization model that was developed as part of the asset management strategy, asset management needs can be prioritized so funding is directed to the highest risk areas. The asset management cycle is an ongoing process that takes time to develop a long-term sustainable and affordable asset management plan and associated financing strategy to achieve the balance between costs and service. One of the main concepts of asset management is outlined in ISO 55000. It's to establish a clear line of sight between the Council's strategic objectives and asset management practice. This starts by reviewing the organizational strategic plan and Council strategic goals, which are set out in the high-level vision and objectives. The asset management policy then defines the key asset management principles and direction regarding those expectations. The asset management strategy then expands on how this policy will be delivered and builds on the principles by translating to key stakeholder needs and aligning asset management objectives. The asset management strategy sets out a number of key frameworks as far as asset management governance, risk assessment, service level profiles, and capital prioritization framework, as well as short and long-term continuous improvement objectives. The last step in this framework involves the preparation of individual asset management plans with objectives in mind that set out the what, where, and why by setting out specific life cycle activities needed in the short and long term to manage the service expectations. Asset management planning starts with knowing what we own, where it is, what it's worth, what condition it is in, and what services they provide. In order to continue delivering safe and sustainable services in a predictable manner, staff need solid information on our assets. Without this information, we are unlikely to be able to identify possible service disruptions and other risks. Stage 1 of the legislation requires at a minimum that asset management plans must include an inventory of assets, the current replacement value, average age and condition of the assets, the current levels of service being provided, current performance and technical measures, the life cycle activities required to maintain these levels of service, the risks associated, and lastly, the 10-year capital and operating costs to maintain those levels of service. In stage 2 is where we start to determine the desired or targeted levels of service and the funding strategy required to meet it. The town's corporate asset management plan is a strategic document that states how the $4.4 billion worth of infrastructure assets under the direct ownership and control of the town are to be managed over a period of time. The Corporate Asset Management Plan Part B, included in the appendix, provides all the information required by the legislation for facilities, parks, licensed fleet, equipment, and information technology assets. Chapter 1 and 2 of the document provides a summary of the guiding principles and framework of the asset management plans, as well as a high-level overview. Detailed information regarding each asset category is found in chapters 3 through 7. As noted earlier, in order to align asset management activities to the town's overall service objectives, it's important to understand what assets support the individual services provided by the town. The total value of non-core assets as of December 2023 is $1.2 billion and represents 27% of the town's total $4.4 billion asset portfolio. This chart provides a summary of the value for each asset category, and as illustrated, the largest portion of non-core assets is facilities with $810 million. For many assets, the estimated remaining useful life based on the age of the asset is considered a good starting point to estimate the overall well-being of an asset. However, in many cases, the percentage of useful life consumed based purely on age may not be the most suitable indicator of the current asset condition and if replacements are needed. Understanding the current condition of our infrastructure is an important piece of planning for asset renewal. Risk is also an important factor to consider when determining life cycle strategies for the different asset categories. Many factors, particularly how the assets are managed, contribute to asset life cycle planning. For example, certain assets receive little maintenance or rehab throughout the asset life, therefore would require replacement at the end or close to its life. So an example of this would be your stormwater pipes, which are underground and we don't see. Other assets receive proactive maintenance or regular rehab to maintain their intended purpose on an ongoing basis. This may prolong the useful life of an asset beyond its expected life. For example, our vehicles and our park grounds are continually maintained. Some assets present less risk of service disruption and have quick replacement times or alternative options available. So therefore, it may be satisfactory to let this asset run to end of life. So an example of that could be some of our equipment. Asset performance should also be assessed as sometimes poor design, incorrect use of equipment, or how the asset was constructed could lead to asset failure before their estimated useful life. So maintaining the right balance between stage of life, good, fair, and poor conditions indicates that funds are being allocated in a strategic manner. As far as condition assessments go, the vertical assets, such as our facilities, and linear assets, like our roads, the actual physical condition grades can be based on visual observations or engineering standards on a periodic basis. Sometimes where no physical condition data is available, we have to use an age-based rating, which has been applied based on the remaining useful life. So I'm pleased to show that as illustrated in the graph, over 99% of the town's non-core infrastructure is in good or fair condition. I think this speaks to the robust capital renewal and replacement programs that we have across all of our program areas. Having a balance across these three condition levels is quite reasonable, with the goal being to minimize the portion in poor condition, but recognize that that doesn't necessarily mean that assets are failing, just that they need attention in the near future. Assets in good condition are generally new or have very robust maintenance schedules. Assets in fair condition are midlife and still performing, but will need monitoring or minor upgrades to continue to reach their end of life. Finally, as I mentioned, assets in poor condition are assets reaching their end of life, and they will become a priority and planned in the near term for replacement or renewal. Creating regular and routine condition assessment schedules for all our infrastructure has been identified as an objective as our future asset management goals. The regulation indicates that for each asset category, the municipality needs to provide the current level of service using both qualitative descriptions and technical metrics. The town has adopted the ISO 55000 service level framework that includes a cohesive suite of level of service measures to help demonstrate the alignment from the corporate vision down to the day-to-day asset management decision-making. This framework is designed to provide a clear understanding of the service commitment and value to be provided by the town that is easily understood. Staff have developed a framework, or what we're calling a service level profile template, to articulate the 3 different levels of service and illustrate the alignment. It involves clearly identifying the customer expectation, the customer commitment, and then translating those goals into customer service values, customer service objectives, and measurable outcomes. The Asset Management Department has worked with the various service departments to establish these levels of service measures, which are incorporated into the individual asset management plan sections, which outline both the customer service objectives and those technical measures. The cost to maintain those levels of service can be aligned to the objectives and can be used as the basis for assessing the benefits associated, and enables justification and/or prioritization of our investments. An example of a level of service for an asset is to set a minimum condition target that an asset needs to be maintained. So here at the town, we currently have a target to maintain the overall road pavement condition at a minimum pavement quality index of 70, and have such determined that on average spending of $9 million is required over the next several years to maintain this level of service. So the customer levels of service level answers the question of what does the customer get, and often refers to statements such as safe, quality, reliable, efficient, accessible, functional, etc. So when developing our service profile, staff focused on 3 customer values: quality, reliable, and functional, to use for both our Part A, which we took in 2022 for our core assets, as well as in Part B for the non-core assets. So we wanted to be consistent across every single asset category. So when we speak to quality, this refers to the condition of an asset and can be linked to our capital renewal and replacement programs. Reliable refers to minimizing our breakdowns and service interruptions, and are linked to our operating maintenance and inspection programs. Functional is about the right asset to meet the service need and ensuring changes in demand or growth or climate are being considered and are linked to master plan projects, development charges study, or climate action initiatives. So this is an example of the customer level of service for the quality value. We've compiled all of the different statements and measures from the different asset categories into one chart. The customer levels of service are a high-level statement and measures that speak to the overall performance of the asset category. These statements are designed to communicate to the customer or the community what they can expect in terms of performance of the town asset. These are a little bit different than program-related service levels, such as hours of operation or the various different programs that are offered. Above is the summary of the customer service objective related to the quality value for each of the non-core asset categories. And as you can see, they all have a similar theme and relate to the overall condition of the asset category. Based on the current performance, the majority of the non-core asset categories are achieving over 90% of their assets in good or fair condition. Customer statements and measures for the reliable value category primarily focus on preventative maintenance and inspection schedules and are designed to look at minimizing breakdowns and service disruption. And for the functional category, we've relied on measures from the development charges study that monitor our progress with keeping pace with growth and reflect a number of assets per capita, such as square foot of facilities per population. For each asset category, you will also see a handful of technical measures identified by departments that are used more on an internal basis to guide their asset management day-to-day decisions. As part of our next phase of asset management planning, we need to assess the current performance that we're seeing in these measures, decide if we're happy, and set targets to determine what it will cost to maintain that desired level of service into the future. Risk evaluation is about balancing the likelihood of failure and the consequence of the service being disrupted or discontinued. For example, there's a difference between the service disruption of an individual piece of equipment failing compared to the service disruption of a water main break. As I mentioned, condition or age may be an indication of the likelihood of failure of an asset. However, just because assets are in poor condition at the end of its useful life doesn't necessarily indicate that we may need major capital intervention. Using risk gives us a more objective assessment and considers impact on the service and identifies critical assets with the highest likelihood and consequence to determine the most urgent needs. Risk can be assessed both at the asset level, which is the risk of the asset failing, and the service level, the risk of not delivering the required service. The risk assessment aims to pinpoint assets that play a more critical role in the service delivery. The town uses a set of criteria that evaluates risk against the 5 categories listed here above: health and safety, legislative or regulatory impact, customer service impact, single point of failure, and replacement time. The criteria has been used to evaluate the risk of assets within each category. I also wanted to mention that climate risk is also a factor that has been raised a little bit more recently. Staff are in the process of developing a decision-making framework for incorporating climate change into asset management plans, and will help to identify climate hazards that are relevant to each of the individual assets, assessing the risk of the climate impacts, and developing actions or contingency plans to build resiliency into our asset management plans. The overall risk rating of an asset is based on the matrix that combines the likelihood of failure, or that condition, and the consequence of failure, which is the criticality, to create an overall risk score for each individual asset. By using this matrix, we're able to identify assets are the most critical with the highest consequence and determine the most urgent need. The table above depicts the current matrix results for the non-core assets based on conditions as of December 2023. Of the total $1.2 billion value of non-core assets, 85% of them fall into the low and moderate risk categories, with only 6% classified as high risk. It should be noted that as the asset age deteriorates, the priority ranking of the individual asset will increase over time. So this corporate asset management plan also summarizes the 10-year operating and capital funding currently allocated based on our 2024 operating budget and the 2024 capital forecast. It looks at the relevant lines of business and capital projects and categorizes them into those 3 selected customer values for quality, reliability, and functional. This forecast presents an estimate of the costs associated when maintaining the various life cycle needs for town assets at their current level of service. Based on the current forecast, the total expenditure for non-core assets will amount to $2.4 billion over the 10-year period, with allocation of $494 million to the quality value, $1.3 billion for reliable, and $672 million for functional, or on average, an investment of $242 million per year. So what are our next steps? So as I noted in those various slides, in summary, the town is doing quite a good job in maintaining their non-core assets in a good state. The next steps will begin to work on stage 2 of the regulation, which will be to assess the information that we've gathered as part of this corporate asset management plan and compare those current levels of service and the performance across the various different asset categories and determine if adjustments should be made. The intent of this phase is to determine those proposed levels of service, the amount of funding required to support those levels, and to develop a financing strategy on how to meet those targets over time. This is where the analysis on the long-term investment required to sustain those levels of service needs to be balanced against the risk, our other funding needs and priorities, the impact to our reserves and reserve funds, and the overall impact to our taxpayers to determine what is financially sustainable. Currently, the regulation has set a target date for phase 3 to be endorsed by council by July 1st, 2025. I did also just want to note that the town is also currently participating in a program called the Natural Asset Management Roadmap Program for municipalities in Ontario, offered in partnership with Intact Public Entities and the Natural Assets Initiative. This program provides direction, support, and guidance to the local governments in developing high-level plans to account for nature in their asset management strategies. So, as I said in the past, asset management is an ongoing process that takes time and effort to develop. An asset management program can take years to fully implement, and we need to continue to evaluate our practices and our plans to ensure that service levels are balanced with costs, options are evaluated using a risk-based framework, funding is directed to our highest priorities, and information on the overall state of our infrastructure is robust and used to develop the optimal life cycle strategies. So at the end of the day, we continue to meet the desired outcome, which is to provide safe and sustainable services delivered in a predictable and cost-effective manner. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, let's turn to Councillor Longo. Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Hewitson, for a great presentation and actually a really thorough report. So I think it demonstrates to the residents of Oakville that the town takes asset management very seriously. My father's a former aircraft mechanic, and he instilled in me the importance of maintenance, preventative maintenance, and looking after assets and seeing stuff that's going on in Calgary. Like, it's important to know what our assets are and how we should maintain them. So I just had a quick question. When it comes to climate change and resiliency, is there anything that you can kind of help focus and kind of give advice on? How are you, as town staff, looking at how do you make facilities more resilient and longer lasting in the event of some of these crazy weather events and other natural disasters that could potentially impact that?
So through you, Mayor Burton, I believe I did mention that staff are looking on developing a framework which helps us formalize how we strategically look at each of our assets, evaluate those climate change risks, and start to develop plans to build resiliency. We've been focused so far on mitigation and as far as the facilities and equipment category goes. The example that we do have of learning to become more resilient and adapt would be on our stormwater infrastructure, where we've just presented our rainwater management plan, and we've identified those needs and are developing that financial strategy on how to, fund everything. So we will look at sort of developing plans similar to that, but for each of the other asset categories.
Okay, thank you. And Your Worship, if you want a motion to approve, I'll put forth that motion.
Thank you, Councillor. That would be in order. Any other questions? Seeing none, Councillor Lischina, I did see one.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick reminder. Thank you for the report. This came about, the deadlines for July was through Ontario government. Did they provide funding for municipalities to start some of this work or at all? I can't recall if that happened or not.
I think there were some program, like grants and subsidies offered to get municipalities sort of started in developing what they needed in order to develop asset management plans, but not really funding to fully develop them, I don't believe.
So not for the different phases?
No.
No. Thank you.
On the good side, it's something that for your home you would do on your own to keep your stuff in good condition. And I know our residents are, I hear compliments every day from people who've driven on a road in a neighboring city and they come home and ours are smooth and they go, whatever you're doing, keep doing that. Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, that carries. Thank you, Councillor Longo. Council, would someone like to move receipt of the Community Spirit Awards minutes? Councillor Shi, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, that's carried as well. That completes all the public part of our meeting before we rise and report. And Councillor O'Meara, I believe, is still, yes, okay. Councillor O'Meara moves that we resolve into a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, that carries. Council, while the staff rigged the technology for a meeting closed to the public, would you like a 10-minute bio recess? We are recessed. Council has met in a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and given direction to staff. Now I need a mover to receive the confidential report from the legal department. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Any objection? That carries. A motion to rise and report to council would be in order. Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection? Carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 8.1 to 8.8, confidential consent item 9.1, discussion items 10.1, 10.2, and advisory minutes 12.1, as noted by the clerk. Is there a mover and seconder to adopt this report? Councillor Shi and Councillor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the report is adopted, and the report and recommendations of the Committee of the Whole have been approved. Now, you have your information items that have been circulated electronically and your status of outstanding issues. Is there any new business of a congratulatory or condolence nature that anyone would like to bring forward? Councillor Shi and Councillor Knoll and Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Nanda and I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone who contributed to the success of First Asian Heritage Festival held on June 1st. So we got 36 local business tent and booths, including 9 food vendors. It's probably over 9,000 people participating in the event through the whole day. So first, I would big thank to the host organization, the Halton Asian Heritage Society, and to Jen Zhou and Joyce Stone for their leadership. I also want to recognize the appreciation to the festival committee members, Angela, Shirley, Jeff, Larry, Rebecca, Fu Xiao, Jenny, Catherine, and Annie for their dedication and hard work. A special thanks to you and it goes to our town staff for their unwavering support. Anna, your guidelines and experience for the first day until the event conclusion were invaluable. Thank you for your insight and help. Our enforcement team, especially Margaret, and Emily played a crucial role in managing a permit application process and the parking arrangements. The park staff did a fantastic job setting up the stage and the picnic tables and ensuring the area were clean. A special shout out to our AV team from Center of Performance and Art Center. They did an outstanding job management the nonstop 8 hours performance. Lastly, thank you to our fire department, library, and Houghton Police for their support and participation, as well as Mayor's Office effort to promotion this event. Together, we made the Asian Heritage Festival a remarkable success. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. It sounds like we made Asian heritage history as well. Councillor Haslett-Teal and then Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just wanted to report that we reopened Wedgwood Pool this weekend with full accessibility now for all. And it is thanks to a generous $100,000 grant from Canada's Enabling Accessibility Fund that enabled that work to be done. We were pleased to celebrate it with the minister and the aquatic staff, and there were early morning swimmers that were enjoying the pool. Our hope is that more accessibility funds will be made available so we can do this across the town.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. I've got three events I want to alert everybody to. I think two I've talked about in previous council meetings, but they're coming up, so I want to do a reminder. First up is the Oakville Family Rib Fest, which comes up this weekend. It is the June 21st to 23rd, 2024. It opens at noon on Thursday to 11 to 11 on Saturday, and 11 to 7 on Sunday. Come and enjoy some ribs, some fellowship with your community, and lots of other foods. If you're like me and you don't like pork, we have chicken and beef ribs, as well as all kinds of other delicious snacks available at the Rib Fest. 100% of the net proceeds go to local charities, a lot of the organizations that we all support. So come out and support the Oakville Trafalgar Rotary Club and the Oakville Lions Club in the Oakville Family Rib Fest this weekend. Admission is $5. Children 8 and under are free, and parking is free, and it is at Sheridan College. And we want to say a big thank you to Sheridan College for once again supporting us, and it is our 12th year. The second event is the 2024 annual Oakville Film Festival. This is the 11th airing of the Oakville Film Festival. It actually starts this Wednesday with a special screening in Town Square of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It continues throughout the week, culminating on the 25th with screenings at the Oakville Center for the Performing Arts, Film.ca Cinemas, as well as online offerings as well. You can find more information about the Oakville Oakville Festivals of Film and Art at offa.ca. It is a tremendous opportunity to support some wonderful Canadian international filmmakers, and there's a number of Oakville-based films being exhibited this weekend as well. And the third is please hold the date on July 1st, as if your day wasn't going to be long enough. We're hosting another of our pancake breakfasts. This year I'm hosting it in conjunction with Anita Anand, and that will be on July 1st from 8:30 to 10:30. You're all welcome. It's free pancakes, but if you do come as councillors, you're required to help flip pancakes. But the public are welcome to come without obligation for July 1st. Start your Canada right, July 1st, 8:30 to 10:30 at Oak Park Neighborhood Center in Ward 5. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knoll. I should point out that Oakville Member of Parliament Anita Anand is the minister who was at the Westwood Pool opening, and we are grateful for all she does for our town. I have a small note of congratulations. I'm unsure how to do this. This year, 3 Oakville high schools have had students accepted at Harvard. And while every high school in Oakville has had a student go to Harvard at one time or another, and Harvard regularly takes a student from Oakville, my source at Harvard tells me that there have never been 3 at once. And so the schools, and my source said, this points to the high quality of our high schools. And now the 3 high schools involved are Abbey Park, Iroquois Ridge, and Oakville Trafalgar. So there's lots of credit to be shared around for our high quality schools. And with that, I will turn to a question of, are there any requests for reports? I'm not aware of any. Councillor Knoll, your hand is up. Do you have one? It's okay. Well, it's in order to have a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Councillor, yes, thank you. And Councillor Lischina and Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the bylaws are considered read and passed, except for 2024-72, which got sent back for more work, as we labored over that one earlier in the evening. I want to thank everybody for all the contributions that everybody made to the meeting. It was a great meeting. It's been terrific working with you, and that ends our work, and the meeting is over.